Before discussing this topic, let's first talk about what is IQ. What is the difference between IQ and intelligence? Are Chinese in US schools smarter? Some people in the world are obviously smarter than others. But how do you compare intelligence with others? Psychologists have invented a standardized intelligence test that converts scores into IQ. IQ is a score, and your true intelligence is intelligence. These were two different things, but they were highly correlated. IQ was a good indicator of a person's intelligence level. Basically, a person with a high IQ also had a high intelligence, and vice versa. Moreover, IQ is obviously related to people's professional achievements, income, and academic level. The average IQ is 100, and most people's IQ levels are distributed in the standard deviation range above and below the average IQ. This means that about 2/3 of all people in society have IQs between 85 and 115. If your IQ is to standard deviations above average, which is above 130, you touch the threshold of genius. Those below 70 are mentally handicapped. There are very few people in both extremes, only 2 or 3 in 100. Talking about IQ is actually thunder everywhere, because the distribution of IQ in different groups of people is indeed different. Some people's average IQ will be higher, and some people's average IQ will be lower. A reliable and prudent attitude is to admit the reality of the distribution of IQ in different populations, but do not rashly attribute it without sufficient evidence. This is also the attitude of the US Psychological Society. Their famous report, Intelligence, Known and Unknown, published 20 years ago, acknowledged the difference in black and white IQ, but argued that there was no evidence that the difference was due to genes or environmental influences. If you want to have a sound discussion about IQ today, I recommend you read the book, Are We Getting Smarter? By James Flynn. James Flynn, probably the world's leading scholar of IQ research today. This book is not easy to read, but if you can read it, it will be an eye-opener. For example, is the increasing number of Chinese students in US universities because of their high IQ? The proportion of Chinese in elite US universities has long exceeded the proportion of the total population. For example, in the 1970s, Chinese accounted for 2% of the total US population. But Chinese students accounted for 14% of Harvard students, 16% of Stanford students, and 20% of MIT students. Is this because the Chinese have a high IQ? No. A study of US middle school students found that there was no difference in IQ between Chinese middle school students and white students, and the difference was in the degree of effort. Chinese students are much more diligent. The usefulness of diligence can also be quantified. Chinese middle school students with comparable grades to white middle school students can have an IQ 7 points lower than their white counterparts. Conversely, the admission line IQ of Chinese students admitted to the University of California, Berkeley, in a given year is 7 points lower than that of white students. Diligence can make up for clumsiness. In the final analysis, Chinese people rely on diligence. By the way, the highest IQ population in the world is indeed Chinese, but not in the US or the Chinese mainland, but Chinese in Singapore. Its average IQ is as high as 114, almost 1 standard deviation higher than the world average, and the overall win is at the starting line. Why is there a Flynn effect? Flynn is the foremost expert on IQ, and the famous Flynn effect is named after him. Although he was not the first to discover, he was the most systematic to study that over the past 100 years, people around the world have become more and more intelligent. The next generation has a higher IQ than the previous generation, both in developed and developing countries. Taking the US as an example, the average annual IQ increase of 0.3 points has lasted for 50 years, which is slightly lower than the global average, but it is already amazing. Quite speaking, if the average US person 100 years ago traveled to today, his IQ would be 30 points lower than that of the average US person today, which is basically mentally handicapped. On the other hand, today's US ordinary people have traveled to 100 years ago, even if they do not carry any modern knowledge. They have stepped into the threshold of genius with just one brain. An even more astonishing rate came from the Netherlands, where from 1952 to 1982, the IQ of the Dutch increased by 22 points over a 30-year period, exceeding the annual average of 0.7. Of course, this only lasted for 30 years, but most countries exceeded 0.6 points per year at the peak of their population's IQ growth. The widespread and significant increase in human IQ has not yet stopped in the vast majority of countries. Some studies suggest that parasites have the greatest impact on the IQ of the population in developing countries, and progress in eliminating parasites has a high correlation with IQ improvement. There are also studies that believe that the most important thing is nutrition, and improved nutrition leads to an increase in IQ. Flynn thinks differently. He believes that these single factors are not sufficient on their own, and they can also find counter-examples. For example, the IQ of Dutch people born in a hungry age is actually higher than that of Dutch people born in a non-hungry age. Flynn believes that the ultimate reason for the increase in IQ is industrialization, and what has worked is the overall changes in society brought about by industrialization, more popular schooling, higher cognitive requirements for daily work and even life, and parents spending more time with their children, etc. What's more, although the two are highly correlated, IQ does not equal intelligence. We have to realize that IQ itself is a test score, and what we really care about is intelligence itself, intelligence, especially general intelligence, or G for short. What is? If a person is good at one thing, but not at another, then he is only good at one thing. And a person is not necessarily smart. But if he is good at doing this and various other things, then he is probably more intelligent, or a high G value. About half of the performance of the same person in different tasks can be explained by his G value. In fact, no one is born a musician, chess player, mathematician, or anything else. The reason is very simple, because these skills appeared too late, too little time. And evolution has not had time to reconstruct specialized brain circuits. The so-called natural musicians, chess players, mathematicians, they are born with high intelligence, but not necessarily destined to succeed in a specific field. Change the field, the same effort. They are equally successful. The IQ test mainly measures general intelligence, which is the G value. There are multiple modules in the IQ test, and the requirements for general intelligence vary. Some are high and some are relatively low. Breaking down the Flynn effect, it was found that it mainly occurred in the modules that did not require too much general intelligence, while the modules that required more general intelligence had little effect. Are we smarter than the last generation? As a result, the IQ research community was divided into two groups. One group believed that the increase in human IQ scores over the past 100 years was meaningless because general intelligence had not changed. The other group, which Flynn himself represented, said, "Are smarter than our predecessors?" If the question is, are we born with more potential than our ancestors, then the answer is no. But if the question is, are we facing broader cognitive challenges than our ancestors and developing new cognitive skills to meet those challenges, then the answer is yes. For example, the level of top human runners in the 100-meter dash had long passed the 10-second mark that was once considered a natural barrier, but their performance in obstacle running had only slightly improved, and there was little change in the high jump. There have been no major changes in people's physique, but society has paid more attention to the performance of the 100-meter run. And the positive feedback of training and improvement mainly occurs in the 100-meter run. However, could it be that as long as there are no major changes in people's physique, these are meaningless? Of course there is. Otherwise, why would anyone care who is the world trapeze? Similarly, IQ-boosting test modules correspond to an increase in people's ability to abstract. A few generations ago, people were more accustomed to mapping abstract concepts to concrete objects and less likely to think around abstract concepts. Today is not the case. The training and challenge of abstract thinking, far from just in the school classroom, has long penetrated into all aspects of society and the family, study, work, and even entertainment. Movies, television, and video games are also important environmental factors for the improvement of this generation's IQ. Classic movies from decades ago, looking back, often feel too naive. I occasionally go back and read the chess books of the 6 super first-class players in the golden age of Japanese Go. And I am often surprised by their low level, which is the same as the first time I read it in my memory. The feeling of being amazing is in sharp contrast. Therefore, the generation gap is a real existence. It does not mean that how do generations adjust their attitudes towards the other generation can be resolved. It firmly exists in the cognitive differences between generations. We feel that the previous generation or two were like mentally handicapped people, and the next generation or to feel that we are like mentally handicapped people. There is simply no way. Of course, the same reason. If you change the words of the founder of the yearbook school and historian Brock, will be more tender. How is a generation characterized? The first is age. This group of people is younger than the previous generation and older than the next generation. More immediately, it is their shared experience and influence. They are excited about the same things. This doesn't mean they agree on these things. There may be fierce differences, but the common denominator is that they are excited about certain things. And neither the previous generation nor the next generation will be excited about these things. There is no way. Finally, there is a story recommended for extended reading. It is about Summers, the president of Harvard and a famous economist, who was ousted for commenting on the intelligence of scientists. If he had read the book, Are We Getting Smarter?, he might not have been ousted in disgrace. Time is limited today. I put this story in the manuscript. You can open the manuscript if you are interested. Attached additional reading, the story of Harvard's president's downfall. If you say the wrong thing, a good Harvard president can't do it. Years ago, then Harvard President Larry Summers talked to a group of professors about why women scientists were underrepresented, and proposed a hypothesis he was doomed to regret. Is it because female scientists have a lower IQ standard deviation? Summers is a famous high IQ economist, finance minister, Harvard president, young and proud. Until this sentence about IQ poked a hornet's nest. The Harvard professor rose up, and the crowd was excited, accusing him of discriminating against women. The dispute continued for a long time, and Summers finally resigned. Is Summers wrong, or is Harvard talking too much about political correctness? It also has to start with IQ. In the previous article, we explained the relationship between intelligence and IQ. And let's understand what Summers' erroneous statement means, that the average IQ of men and women may not be different. But perhaps the standard deviation of women's IQ is lower than that of men. In other words, relative to men, women's IQ is more clustered around 100, less below 70, and less above 130. The subtext is that Harvard will certainly not have mentally handicapped people. And there are many geniuses with an IQ higher than 130, and among these people, there will be more men. On the surface, this is almost an academic question. Why make so much fuss? Are Harvard professors talking about politics so much that they don't even tolerate normal academic discussions? In fact, Summers may not really know, but he does touch on the core issue of gender equality. James Flynn's book, Are We Getting Smarter? Are We Getting Smarter discusses a similar issue. The book asks if male college students have higher IQs than female college students. Can it be said that male IQs are higher than female IQs? There are two competing hypotheses for this. The first hypothesis is that the IQ of both sexes is the same. And the reason why the IQ of female college students is slightly lower than that of boys is because the IQ threshold for college admissions is slightly lower than that of boys. The second hypothesis is that the IQ of men is slightly higher. Both can explain why the average IQ of boys in college is higher than that of girls. The details are a bunch of math. I won't expand it. Interestingly, under the first hypothesis, if the IQ of both sexes is the same, then the standard deviation of the IQ of college girls will be greater than that of boys. According to the second hypothesis, if the IQ of men is superior, then the standard deviation of college girls' IQ will be greater than that of boys smaller. So, randomly guessing that the female IQ standard deviation is small. Summers wants to talk about the IQ of both sexes in a smart way. but rashly touches the forbidden area. Summary of this lecture. To sum up, today we discussed why the next generation always thinks the previous generation is stupid, and behind this is actually the evolution of human cognition. The inspiration for today's mind training is James Flynn's book, Are We Getting Smart? Recommended to you. Thinking Today. I have a thought question for you. We have higher IQ scores than our predecessors, but are we really smarter than them? You are welcome to write your answer in the comment area. The cognitive discussion we're going to have tomorrow is, how should you think about history?